Welcome everybody to our mock law school class. This is a series of mock law school classes that is helping you to get familiar with what to expect in law school, increase your comfort level with it. You'll get a chance to meet all of our first year law school professors, as well as a few adjunct professors who will be running a mock law school class. And our next mock law school class is December 14th with Professor Conklin. Judge Conklin will be doing a topic on the Fourth Amendment rights, and that will be also from 12 to 1, December 14th. So please save the date. Today, we are thrilled to bring to you this 1 hour mock law school class on immigration law with Professor Barreto. Professor Barreto is the director of our New American Legal Clinic, and she teaches immigration law. And she also teaches a required first-year course called Legal Methods. Professor Barreto is a graduate of San Joaquin College of Law. She received her bachelor's degree from UC Merced. Prior to joining our full-time faculty, she worked defending the rights of immigrant children as a staff attorney for the nonprofit organization Kids in Need of Defense. She also was an associate attorney for the Lazaro Salazar Law Incorporated, where she remains of counsel assisting with complex immigration cases. Ms. Barreto is licensed in California and is admitted to practice in the executive offices for immigration review in all locations across the United States. She is a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, the American Bar Association, and the Fresno County Bar Association. She's fluent in both English and Spanish. So welcome, Professor Barreto. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you to hopefully what will be my future students in the near future. I hope to see you all at SJCL soon. We are actually in the process as an institution of launching a hybrid program where we hope to be able to offer some of our program online forever. We were able to do it during COVID and it worked well for us in many courses. And so we know that hybrid is something that a lot of students are interested in. So we're doing that. And so as Diane said, this is a simulated law course. One major difference though is that when we are hybrid and on Zoom, students are required to have their cameras turned on. And that's so that we can verify attendance and make sure that you're engaged. And so I will echo what Diane said. If you could please turn your cameras on, I would appreciate that if you are capable of doing that wherever you are listening to this class right now, because it will feel more like a class and you'll see your classmates and I'll be able to engage with you more. So thanks for your consideration in doing that. Diane, if you can make me a co-host so I can share my PowerPoint on Zoom, that would be great. But as Diane said, I am the director of the New American Legal Clinic. It's one of 2 on-campus clinics, which allows us to teach our students in our on campus, which gives us the opportunity to prepare you for the practice of law with real hands-on cases. So if you take my course, you are taking a foundational immigration law course, and then you are also working in the clinic as a case manager. So today, hopefully some of you got an opportunity to review the handout that Diane sent, because today's class is meant to be a general overview. So it's an introduction to immigration law. Immigration law, and my class in particular, is unique because a lot of the other classes that you'll take, and if you follow the series of mock classes, you'll see that they are more theory-based classes. Black letter law is what we call them. The New American Legal Clinic is quite the opposite. We are hands-on now legal training. I always say that law school taught me how to think like a lawyer, but not necessarily how to be a lawyer, because there are few opportunities, if you don't seek them, to actually see what the practice of law is like. And so our on-site clinics, NALC being one of them and Bren being the other, give you these hands-on opportunities. So today we're going to review immigration law in practice. So we're not going to learn a big history of immigration law today, but we're going to learn what type of remedies are available to immigrants who are in the United States and sometimes out of the United States, and how we can help them through their journey. Now, by a show of hands, and you can raise your Zoom hand, how many people have been through an immigration journey, if you feel comfortable sharing, or have a close friend or family member who have been through an immigration journey and was interesting to you, or even if it wasn't, but how many have experience with immigration in general? So quite a few of you. So you probably know then that it's very complex and very frustrating. A lot of things can go wrong. And that's why the mission of the New American Legal Clinic is to build a sustainable pipeline of quality and effective immigration practitioners so that we can provide services to the Central Valley while providing these services free of charge to the community. So when you work in the clinic, you're a case manager and you are not charging the clients for your services. You're working under the supervision of myself and other staff attorneys and legal professionals. All right, so let's jump right in. Now, these are the three branches of government. If you've taken a government class or maybe a history class in the past, you should be familiar with these three branches of government. So the first branch on here is the legislative branch, and the legislature is in charge of making laws. So when we think of the legislative branch, we're usually thinking of Congress, the House and the Senate, right? And then let's move on to the executive branch. The executive branch is the president's branch, spearheaded by the president. And the executive branch, their job is to enforce the laws. So agencies that are a part of the executive branch would be, for example, the Department of Justice or the FBI. These are all enforcing agencies that are supposed to enforce the laws that the legislative branch has made. And then finally, we have the judicial branch. Now, the judicial branch is, for example, the Supreme Court, and their job is to interpret the law and to see if the law is not only constitutional, but if it was being applied in the correct way. So these three branches of government are what we call here in the United States a democracy, and they all have their own job, and they all serve to check and balance each other so that no branch has too much power. That's the theory behind this. So as a legislator, they can make the law, but the executive would decide whether or not they're going to enforce it. And then if the law is actually enforced, the judicial branch can decide whether or not that law was enforced correctly, or if the law on its face is constitutional. So these are the different organizations, the different agencies that surround the world of immigration. First, let's start with DHS, and we know this as the Department of Homeland Security. This is an organization that became much more popular after the terrorist attacks of 2001, and this is because this needed to fall under an agency that could control immigration and could enforce immigration as well. So DHS is spearheaded by Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. And under DHS, under the Department of Homeland Security, you will see different organizations, different agencies, and some of them are CBP, which is Customs and Border Protection. CBP is who you encounter when you travel abroad and who inspects you upon arrival. So CBP is located at ports of entry. This may be an airport, a land entry, or even a sea entry. ICE, we know, is Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. This is part of the agency who's in charge of, say, let's call it arresting people who have immigration violations or who have prior orders of deportation. So we see ICE in the media a lot, and they would be considered the enforcing side of the immigration world. USCIS is the agency that I personally deal with most. This is the customer service branch of immigration, USCIS is where people apply when they are seeking an affirmative benefit. So they want some type of immigration benefit and they are asking for it. The petition usually initiates with USCIS. So United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. They have many field offices throughout the United States. We have one here in Fresno. They process benefits and they issue interviews when required. The last one on here is OPLA, and OPLA is my opposing counsel, my trial attorney is what we call them. So when I'm in court defending a client, it's usually a DHS/OPLA attorney who is my opposing counsel and who is representing the government when they are moving to deport somebody. Okay, so knowing what we know here now, that would be one of the main branches, DHS, of immigration. The other one is the DOJ. The DOJ is an acronym for Department of Justice. The DOJ is headed by AG, Attorney General Merrick Garland. And organizations that fall under the DOJ are EOIR, which is the Executive Office of Immigration Review. That's where Diane said that I'm admitted to practice. So in addition to being a licensed California attorney, I'm also admitted to practice before immigration court. Immigration laws are federal laws, meaning they apply equally across the United States. But, and however, when laws are appealed through the judicial branch, they're appealed to their respective jurisdiction, to their respective appeals court. So while a law is supposed to be the same for immigration throughout the United States, there are certain laws that apply differently depending on your jurisdiction because of the way that the appeals court has interpreted that law. So for example, an appeals court in California is not the same appeals court in New York. There are different numbers of appellate, and we are in the 9th district. So you may have heard that we're in the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals, but New York is in the 2nd Circuit Court of Appeals. So if somebody appeals an immigration law and the 9th Circuit upholds the appeal, they say, yeah, actually, we agree with you, appellant. You're right. This law was invalid or applied incorrectly. Then that person here in the 9th may win their case. But that same person or a similarly situated person may go to the 2nd district, again in New York, and judges in New York may not agree. And so the laws can be applied differently in different jurisdictions, but the law itself is the same throughout the United States. Does that make sense for everybody? Let's pause there and make sure you understand courts of appeals and how those laws could apply differently. Any questions on that? No, okay. So then we have also under the DOJ, we have FBI, which most people are already familiar with or have heard of before, and then DEA. So we have these two agencies that are in charge. We have EOIR. EOIR is Immigration Court, and this is the court that's in charge of deciding whether or not an immigrant can legally stay in the United States. So when I go to court with somebody in deportation proceedings, I'm going to EOIR. There's many EOIR courts throughout the United States, but again, they're all supposed to apply the law uniformly. Do they? No, they don't, because there's something called TRAC, which is a statistics tracker. You can look this up if you wish. It's TRAC. You can look up TRAC statistics for immigration judges, and you will see that, for example, the asylum grant rate in San Francisco is over 80%. The asylum grant rate in Atlanta is around 3 or 5%. Do you think, by a show of hands, or just if you'd like to unmute, do you think that the asylum claims are just that much stronger in San Francisco than they are in Atlanta? No, I mean, why would they be? What difference would it make? But it depends on the judges and on their political views and on their background and their history. And cases, states in the South tend to be much more conservative than, for example, California. Okay, so even though the rules for asylum are the same in San Francisco than they are in Atlanta, you have different judges and you have different points of view. And so sometimes if you have, I've had clients that say, hey, you know, I'm thinking about moving to the South. Let's just generalize the South. I have family there. It's just going to be easier for me there. I was offered a job there, whatever it may be. If I move, what do you think will happen with my immigration case? And I always say, you know, if you have to move, you have to move, but it's not as friendly of a jurisdiction there, and your chances of winning your case are a lot smaller now if you were to change to a jurisdiction such as that. It just is what it is. Okay, so now that we know that DHS and DOJ are the main players in immigration law, which branch of government do you think that DHS belongs to? And please just write it in the chat. So do you think DHS, without Googling it, it's okay, and we're not like graded on this class, but do you think DHS is legislative, executive, or judicial? Let's start with DHS. Okay, and now let's go to DOJ. What do we think DOJ falls under? So we know EOIR, the court branch, is under DOJ. Okay. So most of you here are correct. Both of these are under the executive branch. And this is problematic for us because this is why people say that immigration law is so political. Both Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and Attorney General Merrick Garland, both of these appointees are appointed by the president in power. And so under the prior administration, we had different secretary of DHS and we had a different attorney general, and they applied the laws very differently. And there was a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric that will come as no surprise for you to hear. And so it's difficult being an immigration practitioner when you know that the laws do not change, because who's the only branch of government that can change the law? Legislative. So the executive can't change the law. When we get a new president, they can't just come in and say, oh, well, I'm making all of these new laws. But they can change how they what the law. How they enforce the law. And so by doing that, they can say, yeah, well, these laws are on the books. For example, these immigration laws are on the books, but we're going to not enforce them. Or you get another president like the one we had prior, and they say, no, we are going to enforce them. And not only are we going to enforce them, but we're going to make the penalties even worse than they were before. The judicial branch should not change the way that they interpret the law, but we know that they often do, depending on the makeup of the court. So we know that the prior president was fortunate to be able to appoint several Supreme Court justices. And now we've had rulings that show this, right? The most recent ruling being the Dobbs ruling, the most popular ruling that overturned abortion laws. Now, we're not going to talk about that today. This is not a constitutional law class, but I want to give you real world examples that help you understand why these things happen. So the judicial branch is not supposed to necessarily change the way that they do their work, but if you have different people sitting on the bench, the judge's bench, interpreting laws different ways, then the result is going to be different, right? I mean, that just makes sense. So This is why the immigration system is so convoluted, because it really depends on who is the executive in power and how they are going to choose to enforce or interpret the laws. And so these things make it difficult for certain immigrants to obtain benefits. We've also had unfortunate problems with the legislative branch not being able to come to an agreement on laws that would simplify or allow for opportunities for immigrants to obtain status, one of those being DACA. So by a show of hands, how many people know somebody that has DACA or that had DACA? Okay, so several of you. DACA is an acronym for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This program was implemented by President Obama in 2012, which allowed for people who entered the United States as children to obtain what's called deferred action and a work permit. Deferred action means just that. All we are going to do is defer. So let's break up the words. Let's look at a dictionary definition for the words. Defer means to not do it right now, right? I'm going to defer that. I'm going to put it aside. And action is take action. I'm to do something. And so the government said, here, we feel bad for you. You were brought as a child through no fault of your own. So we're not going to do anything to deport you. We understand you're here without documents. So here's a work permit, and you can renew this work permit every 2 years. But the DACA people are like, this is not enough. I need future long-term protection, and I should not have to be having to pay nearly $500 every 2 years to be able to legally work in the United States. The DACA renewal cost is $495. And so there's been a lot of push on the legislative branch, on Congress, to please make a law that would allow for people that currently hold DACA to have a pathway to residency and eventually to citizenship. That has not been done. During the prior administration, President Trump said, if you build the wall that I want to build, then we will open up a pathway for people with DACA. The Democratic side of Congress said, no, it's not a good enough trade-off. And not only do we want something for DACA, but we want something for all of the agricultural workers and all of the other people who don't fit into the DACA program, but have just as good credentials and should have been here for 20, 30, 10 years, however many years, and should also have a pathway. So there has not been a meeting of the minds, and this is why we're in the situation that we're in. Okay, so now that we have a general overview of the players of immigration, of how the immigration system works as far as who makes the laws, who enforces them, and who interprets them, do we have any burning questions that this is why you joined the class? I need to know this about immigration today. I would love to know if you have anything that you're just like, I need to know this today, please, and I will try to answer it for you. And then from there, we'll move on to other forms of relief and benefits of how people can obtain status. So any burning questions, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in and say, I need to know this today, please.
Yeah, I was actually, oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
Oh, you.
Arun, go ahead, Arun.
I actually had a question about the power that you talked about, like immigration authorities. When the immigration law is decided, it's applied to all states, but yet we can have different states applying it in different ways. So, for example, you gave the example of California, right? In California, there's a lot of sanctuary cities here. How well can federal law actually be upheld within cities in California compared to cities in like the deep south, like Louisiana or Texas? So in that case, does the immigration authorities or does the federal government even hold the immense amount of power that we think them to have?
Okay, great question. So let's break this down. First, states do not apply immigration law. The only people who apply immigration law are federal courts. Okay, federal courts or federal agencies, USCIS, ICE, CBP, these are all federal agencies. When I said the difference in application in certain sorts, these are different jurisdictions, but not individual states. So California is in the Ninth Circuit, along with, say, Oregon and Washington. It's a cluster of states, and there's different circuit courts throughout the United States, 11 different circuits, right? So for example, Texas is the Fifth Circuit, and we hear a lot of immigration lawsuits go to the Fifth Circuit because the government is smart and they say, we know that judges are more likely to favor us because they don't like immigration in Texas. So we're more likely to get a favorable result if we bring the case before the Fifth versus if we bring the case before the Ninth, where it's a more immigration-friendly jurisdiction, okay? And so that is the difference. Now, regarding your sanctuary states and sanctuary cities, what it means to be a sanctuary state or a sanctuary city is that that city or that state has said, we are not going to cooperate with federal government requests, ICE requests, to give information about our residents. So for example, in San Francisco, ICE may go to San Francisco City Hall and say, hey, we're looking for Linda Barreto. Can you please give us an address for her? She's an immigrant who has several orders of deportation, and we need to get her deported. San Francisco is going to say, no, we won't give you that information because we're a sanctuary state and we've agreed that we are going to protect our residents. So find it some other way. Go about that some other way. There are certain agencies, the Fresno Sheriff's Agency, one in particular, who loved working with ICE and was happy to give this information over. And in exchange for that, California passed a few laws that said confidentiality laws. The Trust Act, you can Google the Trust Act, was one of them, which said basically, if you are a California agency, AKA Fresno Sheriff's Office, you cannot share information with ICE under any circumstances. That goes back to that sanctuary state. And if you do, and we catch you, you can be sued for this. And so people could sue the Fresno Sheriff's Department if they were able to prove that that information was released without their consent. And so that's what really it means to be a sanctuary state or a sanctuary city. Essentially, we're not going to cooperate with the enforcement. The government under the prior administration, under the Trump administration, said, okay, you're not going to cooperate, then we're going to withhold funds. We're not going to fund certain state programs. For some states, it doesn't matter. They were like, we don't need your money. We have our own money as our own state. For other states, it could make more of an impact. And, you know, again, this depends on the person, the president who's in power, as far as how far they want to go to enforce these types of enforcement priorities of ICE looking for people and picking people up and things like that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I had a bit of a follow-up to that then. If federal government makes a law regarding any type of immigration action, would the expansion of sanctuary states as well as the sanctuary jurisdictions, could we not argue that immigration laws don't necessarily make too large of a dent, since like the population of California has an immense amount of immigrants from all countries? So like, does immigration law actually make a large dent if passed?
So there's different types of immigration laws. There's immigration laws that control benefits, who's eligible to become a citizen, who's eligible to become a resident. And those laws, again, are prescribed by Congress, and Congress makes the laws of who's eligible for these types of benefits. If you're asking about enforcement, federal law, per the Constitution, the supreme law of the land is the Constitution. So federal law will always trump state law, but, and this is a big but, and this is something that you'll learn in con law and constitutional law when you enroll, you will learn that there are some powers that are reserved to the states. For example, the power to run a school program, the power to tax certain people. And so in these circumstances, if the federal law is intruding, trespassing on a law that is a state power, the state can say, we don't have to follow that law because that law, that power is reserved to us as states. But generally speaking, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and federal law will surpass state law if those two laws are in conflict. And that's why sometimes you'll see a Supreme Court case that says, you know, state of California versus Department of Homeland Security, because the state of California is suing the Department of Homeland Security for a law that they don't think should be followed in their state because it trespasses on their power as a state. Okay, thanks for your question. A lot of great information there. Alejandro, I saw that you had a question as well.
Yes, I was gonna ask a question in regards to the judicial branch and how exactly it interprets laws. I understand legislative and executive, but you kind of went over that with just that question alone, how it's regional and every state kind of interprets things differently.
So again, we want to make sure that when we're talking about in immigration context, the immigration context of states law, it's not per state, it's per circuit. So don't think of California judges interpreting their law different than, say, Washington judges, because actually California and Washington are in the same circuit. Now, when you appeal a case, the jurisdiction of where you appeal depends on where you live. So let's take you, Alejandro, for example, just for illustrative purposes, okay? You're in immigration court and the judge says, no, I'm denying your case. You are not eligible for asylum. I don't agree with your case. And I'm your attorney and I say, no, the judge got it wrong. They didn't consider A, B, and C, so let's appeal your case. So we appeal your case to what's called the Board of Immigration Appeals. The Board of Immigration Appeals is the same throughout all 50 United States. They're the same. Let's just pretend that they have their office in Washington, D.C. Okay, so the Board of Immigration Appeals reads your case and they're like, no, we agree with the judge. Alejandro is not eligible for asylum. And I say, no, they're still wrong. They're still wrong. They're not considering this, this, or that. Because Alejandro, you live in Fresno. I don't know if this is true, but I'm in Fresno, so I'm going to use that. Okay, so because you and I are in Fresno, we are part of the 9th Circuit. So I say, Alejandro, let's appeal your case to the 9th Circuit. That's the Court of Appeals that hears the decision of the Board of Immigration Appeals, right? So now we are in a different appeals court, and the 9th Circuit says, actually, Alejandro's right. He is eligible for asylum, so we are going to grant him asylum. Okay, but Alejandro, if you and I live in Texas, the immigration judge says no, the Board of Immigration Appeals said no, but now instead of appealing to the 9th Circuit, we have to appeal to the 5th Circuit because that's where we live, Texas. And judges in Texas on the 5th Circuit are not as nice as the judges on the 9th Circuit. So they say, no, we agree with the BIA and we agree with the immigration judge. We're denying your asylum case again, Alejandro. Now your only remedy is to go to the US Supreme Court, the highest court in all of the United States. The US Supreme Court doesn't hear every case. They only hear cases that they feel what they call are novel or issues of constitutional law. So they may say, sorry, Alejandro, we're not even gonna pay any attention to your case, go away. Then the last court that heard your case was the 5th Circuit. So that's the case that's the final word in your case. So it depends what circuit you're in, how different judges can decide your case. And you can think of that just in any type of judicial situation. Say you go before Judge A and Judge A says not guilty, Alejandro, for whatever it is, right? Let's just say petty theft. and you're like, no, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. Judge A says you're not guilty. But then Judge B says, yes, you are guilty. So you can think of that in different ways. Different judges, somebody said this in the chat, have discretion. They have their own minds, their own brains, and will make their own decisions based on their training, their history, and their experience. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes. Yeah, it does. So the judges is a big variable factor there in their perspective on things, and that heavily relies on like where they come from, So I understand. That makes sense.
Correct. Yes, that's correct. And remember that federal judges are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. But federal judges don't turn over with the president, meaning that somebody can be a judge for 30 years. Maybe they were appointed by President Ronald Reagan and they're still on the bench. So we have judges that have been appointed by both Republican and Democratic presidents. So it's not like, oh, well, the judges that are the judges right now, they're only acting this way because President Biden is in power. And if we get a different president later, they're going to act a different way because this president is in power. That's not the point. The point is that they should, have a good mix of different appointments. But is it true that sometimes a lot of judges retire or leave the bench all at once? And so one president gets to choose a lot of different judges? Yes, that's true. And we saw that happened with the Supreme Court under President Trump. There were several vacancies. And so he got to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices. And now the makeup of the court has changed a little bit. It used to be more liberal, and now it's more conservative. And it's going to be that way for a while because the justices that President Trump appointed are very young. So, they're probably going to serve on the bench for quite some time. Okay, questions about any of this before we move on?
Just a really quick question. You mentioned, so are these heard in the EOIR, the court proceedings?
So cases that are in deportation proceedings, so let's go back to my example with Alejandro. He's applying for asylum defensively. They are heard by the EOIR, the immigration judge, that's where they start. The EOIR, they start there. If I don't like my ruling, I appeal to the BIA, Board of Immigration Appeals. If I don't like that ruling, I appeal to my circuit court. In my case, it's the 9th Circuit. And if I don't like that ruling, I can appeal to the Supreme Court. But the fact of the matter is, it's probably not going to be heard in the Supreme Court. But that's what the life of an immigration case can look like. EOIR, BIA, Appeals Court, Supreme Court. Okay, go ahead.
I imagine there's a tremendous amount of backlog, right?
There's over 1.5 million cases in the EOIR backlog. Because 1, they were severely understaffed. 2, people don't realize this, but it's true. Under President Obama, there were more people in deportation proceedings than under any other president. And 3, the pandemic didn't help. There were almost no cases being heard in the last 2 years, or very slowly. And 4, it's a very slow process. There's many hearings that have to go on, not enough judges and not enough courts. Okay. All right. So now that we know that, we talked about the different, how these are both under the executive branch. Now, we talked about briefly the USCIS and how that's the agency that I work with most. So in NALC, your first cases will likely be citizenship cases. Your first clients will likely be clients who are seeking citizenship. And in order to seek citizenship, you have to first be a resident. First, you have to say, okay, I've been a lawful permanent resident and now I'm eligible to become a US citizen. So when I file something with USCIS, if I don't like their decision, if I think that they denied my case unjustifiably, I appeal to the AAO, the Administrative Appeals Office, AAO. Okay, so it's still under the Department of Homeland Security. So that's doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence, because usually they're like, no, we're just going to stick to what we said initially. So that kind of, in my opinion, you know, for lack of a better word, it kind of sucks, because it's like if you go to mom and mom says no, and now you go to dad and dad says, what'd your mom say? That's kind of how I feel that works. Now, we talked about a little just now with Jennifer about EOIR and the BIA. So I said, if EOIR denies my case, the immigration judge says, no, thank you. I then appeal to the BIA. And if I don't like what the BIA says, I can appeal to federal district courts. So I kind of skipped one here because, federal circuit courts. If I don't like what the AAO says, I don't go to immigration court. I don't go to an immigration judge, because immigration courts are reserved for people in deportation proceedings. If I file a case with the USCIS for citizenship, okay, I'm going to use Alejandro, my client, again. So now Alejandro, he's eligible for citizenship. And I apply to USCIS on behalf of Alejandro. I'm his attorney. And USCIS says, no, we're not granting him citizenship. I then can appeal my case to the AAO. So remember, mom and then dad. Of course, dad's going to say no because mom already said no. If I still don't like what mom or dad has to say, then I can go to a federal district court. And now I'm finally in an independent judicial branch. Who's the federal district court in this fact pattern? It's grandma. Grandma always says yes, right? So grandma may not say yes because maybe I am wrong, right? Maybe Alejandro's not eligible for citizenship, but at least grandma doesn't live in my house and she's not going to always take mom and dad's side. Does that make sense? I'm using a silly analogy to try to tie these things in for you. All right, so now if I'm in EOIR, it's because the government has already moved to try to deport me. The government served me paperwork and they said, hey, we're trying to deport you. And then the immigration judge listens to my case and I try to plead with the immigration judge to please let me stay. The immigration judge says no. So then who do I appeal to? Immigration judge says no, who do I appeal to?
Would it be the AAO?
So we're looking at the blue squares.
The BIA?
The BIA. So AAO, Lorena, is for affirmative benefits. I'm asking USCIS for something. I'm asking USCIS for citizenship. They say no. So then I go to the AAO. I appeal to the AAO. When the government's already trying to deport me, if the immigration judge says no, I go to the BIA. And then who do I go to if the BIA says no?
The Federal Circuit Courts.
Federal Circuit Courts. And what circuit are we in?
9.
Ninth Circuit. And then the Federal Circuit Court says no. So then who do I go to?
Supreme.
The Supreme Court. You passed the test. You're done. You graduated law school. Congratulations. I'm just kidding. I wish it were that easy. But now you have the big picture of who you're dealing with, who you're working with, what's the final goal here. Now, an immigrant's journey ends with citizenship, and people ignorantly think it's so easy to get. But if you've had a family member or a loved one, or maybe even yourself have gone through this, you know that it's not that easy to get. Before you can become a US citizen, you first have to be a resident. The only reason you wouldn't have to be a resident first is if you were born in the United States under what amendment? What amendment granted this birthright citizenship? Who knows this?
Is it the First Amendment?
It's not the First Amendment. So the First Amendment gives us
Freedom of speech.
freedom of speech, freedom of religion.
Was it the 14th
The
Amendment?
14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment gives us birthright citizenship, meaning that even if my parents are not citizens, which my mother was not, and she has me, I'm still a citizen because I was born here. That's not true in every country around the world. Good examples are Japan and Australia. If I have a baby and I go to vacation at Australia, and I'm pregnant, and I go to Australia on vacation, and whatever happens, you know, I end up having to stay longer than I thought, or I go into labor unexpectedly, my baby is not an automatic Australian citizen. So this is something I'm not going to say is unique to the United States. There are other countries that have birthright citizenship, but it is not uniform across the world. Okay. So we may be citizens for being born here. The other reason we may be citizens is because even though I was born abroad, now I was born in Australia, but at the time that I was born, both my mom and dad were citizens. Then I'm a citizen too, because even though I wasn't born physically in the United States, I derive citizenship for them. So there's laws that protect against births abroad too. But for everybody else, you first have to be a resident before you can become a citizen. And getting your residency can be really hard. There's certain things that residents cannot do. And some of these are they cannot vote, they cannot serve on a jury, they cannot remain outside of the United States for more than 6 months. They can still be deported. So residents, even though they have legal permission to be permanently in the United States, they can still be deported, even if it's for a very old conviction or mistake, or even if it's for something that they did that is an immigration violation, such as claiming to be a US citizen, but they're not. What do you mean? I mean, I don't speak that much English, and I filled out a application for a California driver's license, and I accidentally checked the box that I'm a US citizen. I can be deported for that. That's crazy. Like, I don't even read English. I was just trying to do my best and trying to do the right thing and get a license. And of course, this is maybe sounds like a silly scenario, but it's happened. I know that you think, well, take someone to help you interpret it. It's not that easy. You know, everybody's in a different situation. So yes, you can be deported for something as like, you know, such an accident like that. And residents must renew their green card every 10 years. The current fee is $540. Now, how can someone become a citizen? They can become a citizen if they have been a resident with their green card, what we know as a green card or lawful permanent resident card, for at least 5 years, or 3 years if they are already presently married to a US citizen themselves. They have a competency in English, reading, writing, and understanding. There are some exemptions to this English requirement. If the person is over 50 years old and has been a resident for at least 20 years, if the person is over 55 years old and has been a resident for over 15 years, or if they have a medical condition that does not allow them to learn English or the civics questions. Also, part of the citizenship process is they have to learn 100 history and civics questions. There's an exemption to this as well. If the person is over 65 years old and has been a green card resident holder for at least 20 years, instead of learning 100 questions, they get an easier test of only 20 questions. They also have to show that they're a person of good moral character, that they have no convictions that would disqualify them, and that they have been physically present in the United States for enough time. Now, again, these are things that we learn in the clinic, and as a foundational student, I teach you how to screen somebody for residency. Once you are capable and ready to screen somebody, you have clients one-on-one and you begin to prepare their citizenship application. So I have so much more to cover. I'm only on slide 5 of 14. So I would love to have a part 2 of this class, and maybe if enough people from this section agree, we can schedule another class in a couple of weeks with Diane and Francisco to hear part 2 of the class of today that I hope to cover. Because part 2 is, okay, well, how do I become a resident? How, I don't even, like, how can I go from having no status, from being in the United States unlawfully, or being abroad and wanting to come to the United States, so that I can eventually become a citizen. So that's part 2 of today's class. And if you would like that, you should send an email to Diane and Francisco, and maybe we can coordinate part 2 of today's class so that we can actually talk about how people can become residents so that eventually they can make it to citizenship. I wanted to leave a few more minutes for questions, anybody that had a question that they didn't get to ask. And I know that Diane and Francisco also wanted to stay on in case anybody had questions about admissions or other things that they wanted to cover. I want to be mindful of your time. I know some of you may be on lunch, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you have right now. And if not, we can also answer general admissions questions. Okay, so if you learned something, can you say hi in the chat? If you learned something today, just say hi.
Linda, I'm wondering if you might share something that you liked best about being a student here at San Joaquin College of Law.
Oh man, so many things. Let's see. I think the thing that I enjoyed the most was being able to approach my professors. Some of them are intimidating. I'm sorry if I feel intimidating. I swear I'm not. People always tell me like, you're so serious, but I just take my work really serious. But even if your professors seem serious, they're approachable and they want to help. All of our professors, including myself, we want to see you succeed. And my end goal is to get you to pass that bar exam so that you can be a practicing attorney. And I really felt that investment in me. Like I felt that my professors were wanting to help me succeed. And I love that, coming from a big university where you just feel like one person in a sea of people. That was a nice change at San Joaquin.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks all for being here. Thanks all for saying hi to me in the chat. Hi, everybody. And hopefully I'll get to see you again. If you're interested in another session, part 2, please email Diane and Francisco and we can try to get to all of the slides that I didn't get to today.
Thank you so much, Professor Barreto. And yes, Francisco Rosas and myself, we're going to stay on the call for any questions that you might have. So feel free to leave if you need to, or feel free to stay on the call and we'll address any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll stay on too in case people have questions on immigration law.
All right, you guys have a good day. I gotta get going, write my paper for work. Thank you, Linda.
Thanks,
I'll do
Paul.
that.
See you soon.
Thank you,
Bye.
Linda, can you stop the recording for me? I think I made you host, so I'm unable
Yeah,
to stop it.
Of course.
Thank you.